Well, I just wanted to share briefly with you some remarks to sort of shape how it is that we're moving forward. One of the things that's going to be a common theme for us in the next little bit is trying to explore and cultivate the idea of civic courage. Civic courage in the sense of enough about the future of the society in which we live and caring enough about the future that we give to our descendants, that we are willing to invest ourselves, willing to invest all that we have so that we might indeed help construct a future worth having. So the idea of civic courage, what it requires, and our encouragement to display that on behalf of those yet unborn, as well as those of us who are already here, will be the major theme as we're moving forward. And it seems only fitting, given the history of CTS, which, as most of you know, some of you may not, was actually founded by a group of abolitionists who were deeply committed to the idea in 1855, when it was an open question whether or not slavery would continue on ad infinitum as a part of American life. And they firmly stood against it and thought that we needed to bring our religion to bear to settle the question. So it is deeply in our DNA to be about the work of both discovering our own civic courage as well as helping others find theirs, so that together we can build a future for ourselves, for our children, and for our descendants that is actually worth having, a future for us all in which there is space for us all to flourish and be everything that God has created us to be. So having framed our time together for the next little bit, I would like to introduce Dr. Christoph Ringer, who is our professor of ethics at CTS and is the chair of our Center for the Study of Black Faith and Life, and is a significant and growing voice, certainly in the field of mass incarceration, but more generally in terms of the social obligation that each member of our society has to one another, as well as the obligation of our society to us all. So, Dr. Ringer, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, President Ray. To students, faculty, staff, board members, to the entire CTS community, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And what I'd like to do is just share with you something that I wrote recently for our challenge and response. I was asked to respond to the theme, the next is now. And then after that, I want to share just a few thoughts on democracy and part of what we can do as a community. What is the relevance of what you're studying, what we're learning together for this moment. And so if you'll just indulge me, I would like to share, I would like to be a preacher just for a moment and give you this particular scripture that I feel is deeply relevant to the faith tradition that I stand in and the communities that produced me. It is the third verse in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, and it says this: all of these died in faith, without having received the promises, but from a distance they saw and greeted them. They confessed that they were strangers and foreigners on the earth. So part of what I'll be talking about today is thinking about, what are we persuaded by? What are we willing to labor for, even if we don't receive it ourselves? So I want to offer this: the next is now. These are powerful and appropriate words for the times we are living in. We find ourselves in a moment where uncertainty is our daily bread and unease is in the air we breathe. The coronavirus has imbued our most mundane decisions with deep fear and anxiety. We've redefined care and concern through distance instead of closeness to keep ourselves safe. With each season, some aspect of our common life presents us with excruciating moral questions, for which we find little agreement and even less moral will to execute. The incarcerated continue to languish in jails and prisons that have become petri dishes. Our seniors continue to survive in nursing homes that are facing unique vulnerabilities and painful isolation. Healthcare and service industry workers continue to operate as a nation's backbone, while their experiences and wisdom go unrecognized and unheard by those wielding the powers of government. Parents, children, and educators wade through what it means to be an educational community in this moment. And so many have died. The numbers keep climbing, grief on top of grief, with so many having been denied the presence of loved ones. During the pandemic, our collective experience of death is like a rolling fog, leaving us anxious and unsure about who we will see again once it passes. The very possibility of continuing this democratic experiment is uncertain and in danger. Unarmed Black men continue to be shot by those sworn to protect them, while others self-deputize in order to murder. And as our attention is fixed on violence in the streets, domestic violence continues to rise, rendering the term shelter in place a cruel irony. Our collective mental health is fragile and fraying. This is the uncertainty of now that marks the next. But this is not all that is present. There is a powerful resurgence in mutual aid to address our daily cares. Everyday miracles are occurring as community organizations meet increasing needs with even fewer resources. The intensity of the pandemic is matched only by the intensity of protests against persistent police violence. Religious traditions are retooling digitally to reimagine the meaning of community while discerning the when and how to gather again. The painstaking labor of activists, motivated by freedom dreams, has created a national conversation with tangible changes once thought unrealistic. Citizens are beginning to abandon the brazen malevolence and incompetence of Trump's regime. Every day, more people find the strength to say the word fascism or evil. This is the urgency of now that marks the next. Amidst the turmoil and slow boil of this moment, it is tempting to overlook that we are living in an apocalyptic time. Apocalyptic in the religious sense of a disclosure or an unveiling, or dare I say, an unmasking. Theologian Catherine Keller reminds us of the relationship between the word pandemic and pandemonium. One of the meanings of the word pandemic is pandemos, or all of the people, a political community. Pandemonium is related to pandaemon, or all of the demons. In this apocalyptic moment, all of the demonic powers that harm, oppress, and threaten the fabric of our spiritual and social lives is running rampant. The commitments that guide CTS are devoted to creating a world not governed by such powers. But the commitments are not just words on a page. We know these demons by name. We struggle against them in our classrooms, congregations, communities, and within ourselves. I believe CTS has a unique contribution in this moment of urgency and uncertainty. Now is the time to forge the next by living into a radical vision of the future while drawing on the ancestral wisdom of the past. Many years ago, my stepfather, who is no longer here, said to me, "I've lived long enough to see the world end more than once." I understand those words better now. While no longer in this world, his words reveal something about the world that is true. There are times in history when the world as we know it genuinely ends. I believe we are living through such a time. As a community of students, staff, faculty, board, and friends, it is our task to do everything in our power to survive and create a society where the splendor of all of God's creation can thrive. So I want to talk about what this political moment, I think, means. I was asked to talk about this upcoming election and civic participation. For me, this particular election fundamentally is not about parties, as important as that is. It's not fundamentally about politicians, as important as that is. This moment is fundamentally about political possibilities. And here I want us to consider the question that Vincent Harding, one of our elders and now ancestor, he talked about the Black freedom movement. He felt that the language of civil rights was too narrow. He wanted to talk about the Black freedom movement. And the question that he poses is America possible? Is it genuinely possible? And he phrases it this way: how can we best live together and work together and be open to our best capacities and gifts? And is it possible to create a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, democratic society, because we are still a developing nation? We haven't been at this experiment very long. And so Vincent Harding answers the question for himself, but I'm hoping that we can wrestle with this question together. Harding also teaches us that democracy and religion also pursue similar questions. What does it mean to be human? What is our purpose in this world? And more importantly, what is our obligation to one another? I want to suggest that one of the things that we at CTS have to offer this particular moment and this question is that religious traditions don't just give us different interpretations of the world. They don't just give us different visions of the world. I think that religious traditions disclose something about the world that is genuinely true. They disclose something about being human that is genuinely true. In other words, religious diversity isn't something that we pursue only so that we can get along, right, or that we can call ourselves progressive. Rather, religious diversity and its insights about the world and what it means to live together are a necessity for our ongoing survival as a species, not just democracy, as a species. And all political visions, well, before I go there, when we think about the relevance of the study of theology for democracy, I want to suggest to you that all of our theological insights, often theological doctrines, have their origins in human experience first, before they become codified, before they become formalized. As such, they are helpful in interpreting the moment in which we are living through. Right? They're helpful in understanding the resources of question is this democracy possible? Now, what we are talking about is a fundamental question. And also, too, I want to offer that political visions always have a utopian element to them. There are always visions of the future, fundamental visions about how we are to live together. But sometimes those visions are irreconcilable. As President Ray mentioned, the Civil War fundamentally is about irreconcilable visions of the future. And I believe that right now, we have a regime that is in place, right, that presents a vision of the future that is irreconcilable with the majority of the people who live in this country. How those visions get reconciled, sometimes they're reconciled creatively, sometimes destructively, sometimes imposed through violence, war, genocide, etc. And so when we think about this moment, I would ask that we would even consider the insights of the abolitionists who for decades have been laboring in order to make this conversation about defunding the police, about abolition. They've been doing this work for decades, and there's a particular phrase. They call it non-reformist reforms. It's a somewhat of a clunky phrase, but it says, how do you continue to pursue a particular vision? How do you consistently move towards a vision by taking step after step after step? And so for decades, they've been doing study groups. They win a campaign to close a prison here. They win a campaign to close a juvenile facility here. They keep moving towards a horizon. So the question before us is, what is the horizon that we genuinely want to sacrifice for? What is the horizon that even if we don't experience it, that we were persuaded by it? We are persuaded by its vision. We are persuaded by its possibility. So for me, this moment is not about saving democracy, but about keeping alive its possibility. Thank you so much.